So remember one thing, if you find a hot guy or hot girl, what do you want to do? You want to hook up. This is a winch. It's a very good recovery aid. And today we're going to talk about winching. Over the next few episodes, we're going to talk about various considerations of how to select a winch, basic winching operations, concept of pulleys, maintenance, etc., and how to safely and correctly use this superb piece of equipment. A winch is basically a hauling device, something that winds a rope over a drum and pulls you. Now, there are a lot of winches in the market. How do you choose which is the correct winch for you? So, there are multiple factors that determine in helping you choose a winch, and now we're going to take them one by one. The first one is the type of winch you want. The second one is, do you want a metal cable or do you want a synthetic cable? The third one is the capacity of the winch that you want to install in your vehicle. Then, of course, you have electrical considerations and mounting considerations. Also remember, there are other factors like what kind of gearing do you want in a winch and a lot of other factors. So if you look at the type of winches, there are basically the 4 to 5 different types of winches. You have electrical winches, you have hydraulic winches, you have PTO winches, capstan winches, and of course you have the other fancy ones like the bush winch and the wheel winch. But the most common ones are the electric, hydraulic and PTO. Now, the electric winch is the most common used thing for, especially for recreational off-roaders. You have PTO winches. What is PTO? It basically takes the power from your engine via the transfer case and sends it to the winch. These are mostly used in farm implements, so tractors or competition vehicles, because these are really fast winches. And you have hydraulic winches. Now, these winches are basically winches which use the power steering pump or a separate hydraulic pump, and they operate the motor. These winches are very slow, but they can work all day. So these are used more in the implement industry, so construction cranes use it, or the fire department where you have to do a lot of long haul winching without worrying about the winch getting hot. Our primary focus is going to be electric winches in this episode. The reason for this is what most recreational off-roaders use. Plus, you don't have a lot of space to get hydraulic pumps installed, or most of your transfer cases don't support PTO. So let's concentrate on electric winches. Now, electric winches also come in different types of gear ratios, but the most common one is planetary gears. You also have some winches which come with spur gears, which are really fast, but they have a very good efficiency, which means they need a very dedicated braking mechanism. And you have one other type of winch known as the worm gear winches. These are extremely slow winches, but they are brilliant at holding loads. Again, these are used more for crane applications rather than recreational applications. How do I select my electric winch? We know I want a planetary gearbox that is sorted, because that's what most of these winches come with, and that's a planetary gearbox is efficient because it's got the sun gear, it's got the planets rotating around it, and it's got the ring gear. Most of the recreational winches will be permanent magnet motors. The series 1 motors are much better, they're much stronger, but they also take a lot of current draw. So again, recreational winches, you'll always get permanent magnet. And today when we're talking about selection of winch for a recreational user, I don't think we need to get into all those details, but let's get into the details that matter to you. I get a lot of questions from a lot of people, and they'll DM me, they'll message me on Instagram. Lot of options that come in is, what is the size of the winch that I take? Now, most dealers themselves are clueless, or they will always tell you get the biggest capacity of the winch. Now, this is the problem that I see. What you need is the capacity to match your vehicle. The ground rule or the thumb rule is very simple. Your capacity of the winch should be 1.5 times your gross vehicle weight. So, for example, the GVW of this car with all the equipment, all the modifications that I've done, let's say it's 2000 kgs. So I should ideally have a winch of 3,500 kgs capacity for this car. I do not want to overkill it by a bigger capacity winch. Now, what will go wrong if I take a bigger capacity winch? I mean, where I can pull a truck, but no, that's actually wrong. A winch is a motor which takes current. As you get into heavy duty motors, they take more current draw. Now, if you look at a winch specification sheet that comes in with your winch, you will see there is amp draw versus line speed. Now, a lot of people get confused with line speed, saying, oh, I have a very fast winch, but that is unloaded line speed. When it is loaded, that line speed from 40 feet a minute might come down to as low as 5 to 6 feet a minute. And now your current draw starts to increase. Some of the winches at full current draw. So let's say I have seen a guy in a Thar with a 13,500 pound winch, which is a major overkill. And when I looked at his spec sheet, that winch at full draw is drawing 500 amps of current. 500 amps of current is a lot of current, and it's going to drain your battery like that. Now imagine your winch is drawing 500 amps from the battery, and now your alternator needs to charge that battery. What is the speed of charging of an alternator? A stock alternator doesn't charge more than 100 to 120 amps back into the battery. So now you're draining your battery continuously and the alternator cannot keep up with that charging. What happens next? Your battery drains fully. When it drains fully, it does not like it because you don't get deep cycle batteries as stock. So this causes a problem and you start getting problems with the battery, and the battery dies much faster than it would normally take your 3 to 4 years of life. The other point that I want to put right now is when you fit a winch, most of your fitters will compromise on ground or earth. Make sure your earthing is very good. If your earthing is bad, your winch performs at a very poor capacity, it draws in more current and that will cause a problem. So earthing is very, very, very important, and make sure it's double checked, and also make sure that it is insulated and covered properly. Up next is, should I buy synthetic cable or should I buy metal cable? Now this is also a very controversial thing because synthetic cable winches are a little bit more expensive than metal. Synthetic cable winches also need much more care and uptake than metal. But which would I choose? I would choose a winch depending on my needs, not depending on what the dealer tells me or what my friend tells me. The reason is my cable works better on particular terrains rather than considering weight or looks. So this winch right here, I have a come up winch that I have chosen. Now this winch has synthetic cable. You can see the nice red synthetic cable. So I like cables which are nice and bright, because when I've put a cable out, I need people to see it so they do not cross it. So get a winch with a bright cable, which is always good for you. In comparison, I have another car here which has a metal cable. Now, I have both these cars and I use both these winches because I'm in the training business. But how would I choose if I had to just do one? So now let's compare synthetic cable versus metal cable. Synthetic cable, extremely light, metal cable, extremely heavy. For the same diameter of synthetic cable and metal cable, the synthetic cable is much more stronger. Now this may be as a surprise to you, but yes, synthetic cable strength for strength is much, much stronger. But if a synthetic cable abrades, it's going to snap. The metal cable, no problem, it can take a lot of abrasion, a lot of abuse. But the problem with metal is it's heavy, it's very difficult to handle compared to synthetic cable. Synthetic cable floats on water, metal cable doesn't float on water. And also the metal cable stores a lot of energy. So when that cable snaps, it's going to come flying and very, very grievously injure someone, compared to a synthetic cable which has lesser energy stored and it might just drop or come flying but at a lesser speed, and you can probably get away with some sort of safety lapse. So while selecting the winch, your first part was what capacity of winch. You got that right, great job. Second, you had to choose synthetic or metal. You decided that, great job. Third thing is, where do I mount it? It's very simple, either front or back. It's going to be surprising to many when I say back, but back in most vehicles have solid axles and newer vehicles nowadays have IFS. A solid axle will take more weight and more abuse at the back, but the common thing is in the front, which everyone takes into account. So let's talk more about mounting it in the front. Now, I'm lucky the Jimny has solid axles in the front, so it can take much more abuse compared to an IFS vehicle, especially when the winch is loaded and under stress. So how do I put a winch? If I have stock bumpers, you get a winch plate which is securely bolted onto the chassis, on which you can put in your winch, mounted your winch, run the electricals back to the battery, and then either you cover it with your stock bumper or you make a cutout on your stock bumper. Or if you do a lot of hardcore off-roading and you also want added strength of the bumper to take knocks, you get a dedicated bumper with a inbuilt winch plate and you mount it. Now here I want to say is, you need to get a manufacturer who gives you a bumper where I can see the entire winch. Nowadays the trend is to go silent, go assassin mode, where the winch is covered. The problem is when the winch is covered, it looks nice, it becomes stealthy. But the problem is now I cannot see my cable. So I cannot see if I'm messing up, if my cable is bunching, if my cable is bird nesting. A lot of problems that we'll come to later. But if you are getting into winching, I would strongly advise get a bumper where the winch can be visible from outside, or at least you can see the drum very clearly from outside. At this point, you need to remember that when you mount a winch, which could be 30, 40 kilos depending on the capacity of the winch and the type of cable and the bumper, it's going to cause your suspension to sag, your car front end to sag. So if you get these things done, you might need to consider beefing up the suspension. When I say beefing it up, I don't mean lifting it up, but I just mean maybe getting it back to stock level. I personally don't like lifted cars. I just like to get it back to stock level, but that's a purely personal choice. You can do what suits your needs. Let's quickly look at the parts of a winch. The first thing that you have right here is your winch motor. Now this is your heart of the entire winch. It gets power, the current that comes through big fat cables into the winch motor. It makes the motor spin and go around. As the motor goes, it doesn't have too much of torque. What you want in a winch is a lot of torque and low speed. So there is a shaft that runs through the center of this into your planetary gearbox. What your planetary gearbox does is it now multiplies that torque depending on the ratio. So usually it's anywhere from 1 is to 15 to 1 is to 20, it depends on the make of your winch. But now that high speed motor is now getting converted into low speed, high torque motor. This is now connected to your drum. On your drum is what you have your synthetic cable that is wound up, which is what pulls and removes the car. Now remember one thing, inside that drum you also have a braking mechanism. Now this is very, very important because here I see a lot of mistakes with regards to brakes. This brake is designed to activate when there is load on the drum. When the winch moves in the in position, so when you're pulling something, those brakes disengage. But when you're going out, when you do winch out, those brakes activate. And now every time you do winch out, you are basically rubbing against those activated brakes. So if I give you an example, remember your handbrake. If you put the handbrake on and you start driving, you can drive, but you start to overheat your brakes and you can go very slowly. So if you need to winch out, what I suggest is use this little lever, which is known as the free spool, which disengages the brakes and the gearbox. And now you can freely remove the cable and not do out. Your winch out is used only for very special occasions, which we'll come to later. But remember one thing right now, a winch with a planetary gearbox like this cannot be used to lower a vehicle down a slope. It is only to winch yourself or another vehicle up a slope. So there are thick cables that come into the motor which powers the motor. Now you need to control the motor to either run in or run out. Now if I wanted to control it with a remote like this one, I would need big fat cables on this remote control, which becomes very difficult for me to use. So that's where your solenoid comes in. What a solenoid does is, it's got two thick cables that run into the solenoid, and now it converts that into an electrical system where I can use a thin cable remote. So all I do is, I plug in the remote into the solenoid and I can now control the winch. I can convert that heavy duty current into a smaller amp just to control the winch. The solenoid can be mounted either on the bumper, or you can mount it inside the cab, or you can have your remote running from here via this into your cab, whatever suits you. I prefer it outside because I might have one more person helping me with winching rather than me doing all the winching from inside, always on my own. A winch remote is very simple. It's just got two options, a joystick, which if I push up will go out, pull down is going to go in. So it's very simple. It's a momentary switch. So out, it has to be pressed. If I release, it comes back to 0. Push down, in, release, it comes back to 0. The next part is of course, your synthetic cable or your metal cable. Then it's got these two connecting rods, which are basically holding up both these parts of your winch. Now, these connecting rods are very important because they are not load bearing and they are just there to keep these two parts in its proper space. If your cable starts to bird nest or starts to bunch up in one side, it's going to rub against these connecting rods and it's going to break them and destroy your winch. So make sure there is never any load on these two connecting rods. The other thing is, whenever a winch is mounted, you always want the cable to go from below the drum and exit. Again, a lot of these installers don't know which is the correct orientation. I've seen a lot of times the cable comes from the top of the drum. The cable always must come from the below of the drum and exit through a fair lead. A fair lead is basically a guide for the winch cable. You get two types of fair leads. Here we have a horse fair lead. So basically it's just got these nice bevels. So when the cable comes out, it doesn't rub, or when it rubs, it doesn't have sharp edges to cut. But again, we are not going to use much of these bevels. Our winching process should be such that we do not touch any of these sides. So the horse fair lead is just a guide to prevent any sharp edges from coming in contact with your winch cable. The other type of fair lead is known as a roller fair lead, which I'll show you on the other car. This is known as a roller fair lead. Now roller fair lead, because it's got rollers which will move as this cable goes along it. Now the advantage of roller fair leads are, since it rolls, it causes lesser heat buildup, but the problem is, because it's got sharp edges or it can get pinched at these areas, you do not use synthetic cable in these areas, but you only use it for metal cable. In the market nowadays, there are some kind of roller fair leads for synthetic cable, but they're extremely expensive, sometimes more expensive than the entire winch itself. So my suggestion, don't go for these fancy things unless you get sponsored, but otherwise just get your horse fair lead. Most winches will come with a hook. Now if you come closer, you'll see, let's talk about different parts of the hook. This is the beak of the hook, this is the gate, the pin, and of course the cotter pin. Now again, make sure whenever you have a hook, the cotter pin is always on the opposite side of the gate and not on this side. I've seen a lot of pins on this side. Now this is a very, very thin pin, and if it is on this side, every time you're winching into something, you're hooking up into something, this will get abraded, and if this fails, this pin is going to drop and you're going to lose the entire line. So I don't prefer this kind of arrangement because the beak of the hook is the weakest part, and if this breaks, you have this entire thing come flying at you with speed. Secondly, what I want you to remember is, with a hook, you always will hook up. So if this is a recovery point, you will hook up. In case of a beak failure, with the momentum, this will go down and hit the ground and take all the forces. If you had hooked down, and if this beak fails, this hook is now going to come flying up and kill you. So remember one thing, if you find a hot guy or hot girl, what do you want to do? You want to hook up. So remember, hook up, and that will save your life. What do? I don't like open pieces of equipment. So for that reason, I don't prefer S hooks, or those fancy hooks that you get on the bumpers which are open. I always prefer a closed loop system. So what I have here is something from Factor 55. This is known as a flat link, and this is where I can put my soft shackle, bow shackle, and it is closed. So there is no chance of something which is open which can fail. Second thing is, what I have noticed is, once you mount a winch on the vehicle, I've always seen that cable going and attaching somewhere to this side with a hook. Now you see, this cable is going to go at an angle, and then when you want your winch to be mounted, it's always under tension. When your winch is under tension, this part is constantly bent. So when it's constantly bent, it's not going to like it. It's going to be bent. If it's a metal cable, you'll have a permanent kink out there, and synthetic cable will also start flattening out there. With a Factor 55 flat link, it just comes straight against the fair lead, and this problem is solved. Secondly, when you have a cable that is running from here all the way to here, you have things that can snag while you're off-roading. You have a lot of stuff on the road that is flying and damaging the cable, which you don't want to do. So always make sure your cable is neatly spooled inside under tension. And synthetic rope does not like sunlight. It's made of ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. Super strong, but it hates UV light. If it's constantly exposed to UV light, it starts to degrade, and when it degrades, the problem is it will fail. Now remember, the winch capacity, as I said, was 1.5 times GVW. Your line should be 1.5 times the winch capacity. So this is your fail safe. You don't want that to get degraded. Normally the winch manufacturer supplies you a rated line, but if you had a winch failure or cable failure and you've changed your cable, make sure you buy a cable which is 1.5 times the winch capacity. How do I protect my cable from UV light? Very simple. If you don't have a winch cover, take any material, resin, leather, whatever it is, and all you need to do is just securely cover your winch. Make sure it doesn't fly off. What I do is after I put this on, I'll put a couple of bungee straps which will secure this. So it will prevent not only sunlight but also bird poop. Bird poop is highly acidic, highly toxic, and it's completely going to dissolve my cable. So cover your winch and get high life out of it. Once you've run your cables into the battery and you've had your positive negative done, what I like to do is I like to install a cutoff switch. So the red cable comes here into the cutoff, and then from the cutoff I go to the battery. The reason for this is if ever your solenoid is exposed to rain and you don't have a cover on top, if water goes in, you could short the battery and you could short the solenoid, and the winch can start to run on its own, which could be a problem. So always simpler is cut the battery off whenever you want to use it. All you need to do is move it to green, your winch is active and you can start winching. So I chose Come Up Winch because it suits my needs. Also, it's got a very good service backup here in India, which is also very important when you buy a winch. And now that I've finished, I've installed, I've checked my electrical considerations, everything is set, I'm still not ready to winch. In the next episode, I'm going to tell you about how to pre-load your winch. Why is pre-loading important? How to set up your winch, how to understand the various gear that is required with a winch, and how to get started before we actually go and get down dirty and winching. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe for the next one.